Well, good evening. Welcome to those of you who are able to join me. Be great to get some comments going, so that I know that I'm not just talking to myself. But yeah, let's get physical. Tonight's theme is sparkling wine, and I've chosen 3 wines to try. Those of you who've been able to source them, that's fantastic. You can try them with me as we go along. Those of you who've maybe only selected one of the 3, that's absolutely fine. You can start drinking that whenever you like, but I will get to it, I promise, in due course. Those of you who haven't got one of the 3 sparkling wines that we're going to try tonight, well, you are welcome, and you are welcome to taste along with anything that you have with you. If you want to jot down in the comments what you've got, then I can maybe let you know what I think of it. In a nice way, I promise. Even though I don't have it in front of me. But otherwise, you're most welcome to watch and maybe try the wines at a later date. So the 3 wines we're going to try this evening are, in the order in which we're going to try them. This is the first one. This is Chapel Downs Sparkling Bacchus, and this is from Kent. That's the 2018 vintage. The second wine we're going to try is this one here, and this is Valdo's Ora Pura, Valdoviadene Prosecco Superiore, non-vintage. And then the third wine we're going to try, this one is from South Africa. This is Graham Beck's Methode Cap Classique, Brut non-vintage. Sean, sorry it was difficult to find my link. Glad you're able to join us. Welcome. Nick, hi. Good to hear from you. Nice to know that that everything's set and working. So let's start off with the first wine. This is Chapel Downs Sparkling Bacchus. Now there are hi Lisa. There are three principal ways of making sparkling wine. 3 principal ways. The first, the easiest, and the least complicated by far, is simple carbonation. You could call it the soda stream method if you like. And this is what my good friend Josh Donahue Spire has done at Chapel Down, the head winemaker there. He wanted to make something a little fun, and a little less serious than you would normally find Chapel Downs bottle fermented sparkling wines. They're smashing, absolutely wonderful. We do their Brut, we do their Rosé, and they stand, they hold their own up against champagne. This is uniquely English. Nobody else makes sparkling Bacchus like this. Bacchus is a grape variety that originated in Germany. It's not considered a noble grape variety in Europe. It's not very widely planted. But here in the UK, it makes lovely, herbaceous, floral, sometimes tropically fruited still wines, reminiscent of, say, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Loire Sauvignon Blanc, depending on when the grapes are harvested, how ripe they are, the kind of winemaking techniques that have gone into it. Anyway, what Josh decided was to take what was already a delicious Bacchus and carbonate it. And I don't know if this had anything to do with it, but Josh and I used to work together at Vinopolis. In fact, in a decision he may have come to regret, he hired me when I worked there. And one of the things we would do for giggles would be to take still white wines and carbonate them with a soda stream just to see what the difference was. And we found that in some cases it did genuinely improve what was considered to be not a particularly good still wine. But that's, I don't know if that was his inspiration. Josh, when he left Vinopolis, went and studied at Plumpton. And Plumpton is the agricultural college attached to Brighton University, and they produce actually produce more winemakers than our industry in the UK can find jobs for. So one of our major wine exports is actually homegrown wine makers. They take them all the way up to graduate level. They're now teaching postgraduate degrees at Plumpton. And they're acknowledged to be one of the world's leading winemaking colleges, which is, I think, an English winemaking success. Anyway, the wine. So I'm pouring this, I'm tasting this in the classic flute. There's a fair bit of controversy about the ideal shape of glass for sparkling wine. The flute here is really designed to maximize the duration of the bubble, if you like. The wine will stay sparkling for as long as possible in a flute because you've got a small surface area at the top for the carbonation, the bubbles, to escape from the wine. So the wine's going to stay fizzy for longer. One of the classic shapes of wine glass for sparkling wines is known as the coupe or saucer. It's rumoured to have been modelled on the shape of Marie Antoinette's breast, but I think that's an urban myth. I doubt very much if a glassmaker got anywhere near the Queen of France's breasts, but it's a shallow glass. The advantage of the shallow glass is that as you approach it, you get an enormous waft of the character of the wine, because the bubbles are bursting all over the surface of the wine and pushing up lots of aroma and compound into the air, and so you get a big hit of the aroma of that wine. The only problem with the coupe is because all those bubbles are coming off all at once over a wide surface area, the wine goes flat quite quickly. The coupe's ideal if you're going to drink your champagne quickly. And I think at royal events around the French court of the Sun King and what have you, people did consume their fizz quite quickly in joyous abandon. But the flute is pretty much the standard shape now for drinking sparkling wines. You can get more tulip shaped flutes which hold the aroma in, but as long as you leave a little bit of space inside the top of the glass to get your nose in and have a sniff, it all works. So on the nose, the aroma of this Bacchus, which is still sparkling. I mean, it's a carbonated sparkling wine. This is not the finest technique for making fizz, but it is still retaining its bubble. On the nose, it's got that lovely Bacchus aroma, hedgerow characters, elderflower, blossom, and zesty sort of grapefruit characters, but there's something much riper, almost tropical about it. It's a pineapple character. On the palate, you've got that lovely tingly effervescence, which boosts the acidity a little bit. so it makes the wine even fresher on the finish. The carbon dioxide dissolved in the wine, so it gives you a lovely fresh finish, but it is really ripe, really tropically fruited. This is nothing like champagne, nothing like cava, nothing like prosecco. This is quite different. I guess the closest to it I've ever experienced would be a New Zealand sparkling Sauvignon, but no, this is in a glass of its own. No, that's really nice. I can. This may be heresy to long-standing debentures of ticket holders for Wimbledon, but I would rather have a glass of this with a bowl of strawberries than any brut champagne any day of the week. This is slightly sweeter, slightly softer than a brut style, but up against something like strawberries and cream, be absolutely perfect. Sean, you've asked if this would be a sort of a British take on Prosecco. I would suggest not. I think it's a bit. It's more fun than that. There are people making Charmat or tank fermentation sparkling wines in England which are closer in style to Prosecco, but this is quite different. You don't get this kind of fruit character in a Prosecco at all. But we're going to go on to try a Prosecco now, and that'll give me something to contrast with it. So this is, as I say, this is Valdo's Ora Pura Valdobbiadene Prosecco. Valdobbiadene is the core area of the Prosecco region. Going back to Vinopolis again, I can remember having an argument with one of my colleagues about whether Prosecco was a grape or a place. It turns out that it's kind of both. There is a village called Prosecco, and the local name for the grape has been deemed Prosecco, but and they used to sell the vines to foreign parties like the Australians as Prosecco. But Prosecco came from nowhere in terms of popularity. Nobody predicted its rise. It was, in fact, when it first started to be popular, everybody said it was going to be a flash in the pan. A lot of people in the wine trade looked down their noses at Prosecco because it was, on the whole, tank fermented, relatively cheap, considered to be a bit of a Friday night special, cheap, bubbly, nothing to write home about, sing hymns of praise about. And it took off because sometimes the wine buying public knows things about what it likes that the experts are unable to predict. It took off in such a way that the local consortia in Veneto, I should say Prosecco comes up from the northeast of Italy, the Veneto region, and the consortia looked on the success of this wine and with some dismay at the amount of Prosecco vines that were being planted elsewhere. Germany, Australia, Austria, Hungary, everybody was putting Prosecco in the ground and making rosé Proseccos and all sorts. One company was actually marketing one called Rosecco, just dropping the P altogether. And so they rather moved the goalposts a few years back and declared that Prosecco had to come from a defined region, the Prosecco region, which hadn't really hitherto existed, but the Prosecco region in Italy, delimited region. The grape variety was now to be known as Glera, which doesn't sound nearly as attractive as Prosecco, which is, I'm sure, why they picked that name of all the synonyms. Virtually every Italian grape variety, by the way, has multiple names, and Prosecco and Glera have both been names for the same grape variety. So now we have to call it Glera. The Australians said, hang on a minute, when we bought these vines, you told us they were Prosecco. It says Prosecco on the label. Look, I've got the invoice. And so the Australians can call their sparkling wines, homegrown Proseccos, Prosecco in Australia. They can't export them and call them Prosecco. If you buy Australian Prosecco in this country, it will be called Sparkling Glera, and you'll look at that on the label and probably think, I don't want any of that. Glera is not a particularly attractive name. So Prosecco comes from northeast Italy, and it's made with the Glera grape. Valdobbiadene is the centre of the region. Valdo, as a wine company, was founded in 1926, bought by the Bolla family, who renamed it Valdo. It had a really long, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, name before that. Sergio Bolla, who was the father of the current chairman, Pierluigi, helped create the DOCG to write the rules around the quality of Prosecco. And the Ora Pura here, for me, this is my favourite wine that Valdo produce, and it's because it's Charmat method. I'll explain Charmat in a moment, but it's not bottle fermented. It is Prosecco. It's quality Prosecco, but it's not pretending to be or trying to be champagne or something that it's not. Glera, when you put it through a bottle fermentation, when you make it in the style of a champagne, loses, for me, it loses the attractive fruitiness, the relative simplicity of classic Prosecco, quality Prosecco, and doesn't become a great bottle fermented sparkling wine. Italy produces some fabulous bottle fermented sparkling wines, but for my money, they're not made with the Glera grape. They're not Proseccos. So I should look at the bubbles first. They always say, look at the wine. Don't just get your nose and tongue in there. Get to look at it first. So I'm not going to say that the bubbles are that much finer than they were with the Chapeldown Bacchus. They do start off maybe a little smaller in the glass. When you produce the bubbles via a fermentation technique rather than simply squirting it into the wine, as it were, the soda stream method, you do end up with a tighter concentration. I'm mixing my metaphor, mixing my descriptions now. You end up with a finer bubble. You end up with a smaller nucleation within the wine. That's getting a bit technical. But you end up with a finer bubble, and you end up with longer lasting bubbles. I promise you, this is my first drink of the evening. Second, I haven't had this one yet. So the Charmat method. What's the Charmat method? The Charmat method is a fermentation in a tank rather than in a bottle. When you ferment grape juice, you get alcohol from the sugar. We know that. But the sugar is converted into alcohol and carbon dioxide by the yeast. So if you conduct that fermentation in a sealed environment, the carbon dioxide produced by the fermentation is absorbed, dissolved into the wine, and that is either tank fermentation or bottle fermentation is the way that traditional method sparkling wines are made. Charmat was a bloke who came up with this method of using tanks rather than bottles. The wine spends 5 months in this instance in the tank, so it ages on the yeast lees. That's the dead yeast, and it's gets 5 months on its lees in the tank, and then it's bottled under pressure from the tank. It spends about 3 months in the bottle before it's shipped out to us. It's an interesting method because it reduces the cost while retaining a lot of the quality. If you extend the lees aging in the tank, you can get yeastier flavours, so it can start to smell and taste a bit more like a bottle fermented wine. But ultimately it's a relatively inexpensive way of producing. If you look at that, you can see there's still some lovely fine bubbles forming in the wine there. Okay, so in terms of aromas, Prosecco, you get typically you get fresh pears, conference pear sort of aroma. Incidentally, when you taste sparkling wines, you don't need to draw air through them. You don't need to suck air through them. You know that revolting noise I was making the other week, tasting still wines. What we're doing there is we're drawing air through the wine, pushing the aromas to the back of the palate where they'll rise up and reach our sense of smell, which is really what's making most of the impression when you taste wine, is your sense of smell. Sparkling wine does all the work for you because the bubbles are going off against your palate. You can feel them around your palate as part of the fun, but they're pushing the aromas up to the sense of smell for you, so you don't need to slurp the wines. It's interesting actually, if you're at a wine tasting, a professional wine tasting all day, and you you can get quite tired towards the end of the afternoon. And sometimes if you're switching between still and sparkling wines, you can forget yourself, and you will take a swig of sparkling wine and draw some air through it, and then then things really go bonkers on the palate, and you'll find your the wine goes up the back of your nose, down the back of your throat, and you're coughing and spluttering. So a little hint, if you have the choice, try all the sparkling wines at once, and then you get a measure of what you're doing. Obviously, if I was tasting these wines in a professional setting, and there were maybe a couple of hundred wines laid out to try, I would be spitting them out as well. But on this occasion, I'm tasting at home, and I can I can swallow with the rest of you. So lovely pear, a little bit of green apple, an almost kind of caramel sweetness character, like a tart tatin sort of flavour, and just a hint of the pastry base of the tart tatin. I'm getting a bit over descriptive, perhaps, going a bit Jilly Gordon on you all, but yeah, it's got that little bit of complexity. It's a relatively simple wine. It's easy to appreciate. But yeah, it's got just that little bit extra, and that's why I'm a particular fan of Valdez Oro Puro. Of all the Proseccos that we stock, When we opened the food hall 13 years ago, I think we stocked 2 Proseccos, and demand is such now that I think we stock 9 or 10. No one supplier can actually meet demand for all the Prosecco we sell now. It is so popular. As I say, it came from nowhere. People in the wine trade were arguing about whether it was a place or a grape, and it stole the hearts of so many of us here in Britain. So that's 2 methods. The third method, known as the traditional method, the champagne method, if you're talking about champagne. The Champenois are a notoriously litigious bunch, and so it's probably best not to mention champagne in regards to any sparkling wine if it's not champagne. So this third method, the bottle fermentation method, this is actually the oldest method of producing sparkling wine. No, I need to take that back. There is a tale, and it's told far better by Oz Clarke than it is by me. But there is a tale that when Cleopatra wanted to seduce Julius Caesar, she didn't just have herself rolled up in a carpet and then deposited at his feet. She actually plied him with wine that was still fermenting, and they added fresh grape juice into the amphora of wine to provoke a vigorous second fermentation to make it all frothy. And so that could possibly be the first ever documented evidence for deliberate sparkling wine. I don't have the sources, and as I say, Oz Clarke tells the story far better than I do. But the first documented evidence we've got of bottle fermented sparkling wine is actually English. It's not French. Dom Perignon is credited with an awful lot of things, but inventing sparkling champagne is not one of them. He is picked to the post by a chap called Christopher Merritt, and Christopher Merritt, some 20 years before Dom Perignon entered the abbey at Hautevillers in Champagne, he was a monk, and monks pretty much ruled the roost in Champagne at the time, and made all the wine. But this chap Christopher Merritt was one of the founding members of the Royal Society. This is back in the days of Christopher Wren, the Great Fire of London, 17th century. Christopher Merritt was, until fairly recently, merely famous for writing the first ever comprehensive list of British birds and British butterflies. He was a polymath. He did a lot of stuff. But one of the things he did was he drank. And he drank in the bars of the City of London. And he noticed that they had a method. They had a trick, a technique. They would take still wines in the barrel and add to them molasses or sugar, or honestly anything sweet that was to hand, I think. Bottle them sweet, and this provoked a second fermentation in the bottle, and then they would sell the wines all brisk and lively. He described them as all brisk and lively. So this is the first description of what became the traditional method, the bottle fermentation method, the champagne method, or as the South Africans would call it, méthode cap classique. You can see that there on the label, méthode cap classique. Everyone from the guys in Limoux in the south of France to a bunch of Italians up in Val d'Este say, yep, We invented champagne before the champenois. We've got the English who got the first to put it in print. In Limoux, they've got records, monastery. The monks are at it again. Monastery records in Limoux, which may or may not refer to sparkling wine some 100 years earlier. The South Africans claim, with a certain amount of justification, to have independently created sparkling wine. So the Méthode Cap Classique is their way of saying this is our take on the bottle fermentation method. We're not going to call it Méthode Champenoise. This is Méthode Cap Classique. We came up with it on our own. Maybe. But anyway, what they've done is they've taken, in the case of the Graham Beck, they have taken a combination of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which is two of the grapes that go to make up champagne. It's in half and half proportion. They've put that in the bottle as a still wine, added some sugar, and that provokes a second fermentation. That's why the bottle's thicker than the other two, and is noticeably heavier, because it's had to undergo a certain natural process, which isn't necessarily as predictable as one might like. One of the things, if you get to visit a champagne house in France, and you go round the cellars, you will always hear a bottle going pop in the background at some point in your tour. They'll probably have millions of bottles on their lees aging away, but every now and then a bottle will discover its innate weakness in the glass and go bang. It happens. But that second fermentation produces a lovely concentration of carbon dioxide. If I hold this glass up to the camera there, you can see how fine the bubbles are compared to the other two sparkling wines we've tried. So you've got a steady stream of very small tight bubbles, and they'll last longer too, and that's a natural part of this bottle fermentation method. It leaves you with a very fine mousse, a very fine bubble. So Christopher Merritt, where are we? Yeah, so 50-50 Chardonnay Pinot Noir. You've added some sugar to the wine. Fermentation proceeds, and then we start to get into difficulties. Back around 1800, you could buy a bottle of champagne in London, and it would come with a bag of sugar because it was bone dry. Or today they'd call it zero dosage, ZD, Brut Zero, various names for it. It was bone dry, and it still had that yeast that had been conducting the fermentation in the bottle. Now they did find a way. They did find a way to remove the yeast, and they did find a way to gently sweeten the wine. Now, the way they removed the yeast, this is something that was invented by Veuve Clicquot, the widow. She and her cellar master took. She had a big kitchen. Took her kitchen table, drilled holes in it, and then, you see I've got my finger in the top of the bottle of Aldo here. I'm going to regret doing this. They took this. They took the bottle of sparkling wine with its yeast in, and gradually took it from horizontal to vertical, leaving the yeast in the neck of the bottle. Now, the yeast settles. It's very sticky stuff. Settles around the cork, or these days more likely a crown cap, and forms a little plug in the neck of the bottle. So you very gently bring it back up like this again, and when you release the cork, boom, out flies the plug of yeast. Now today that's done, tends to be done with a device called a Girapalette, which instead of doing it manually, 2 bottles at a time, in a pupitre, a pulpit, what they called her desk once she carved holes in it and put it on its side. A pupitre, a Girapalette does this automatically, rotates the bottles and tips them upright so that the yeast settles into the neck. Then the neck of the bottle, I'm going to use the Valdo again, the neck of the bottle goes into a bath of brine. That freezes the neck, and you can disgorge, you can release the plug of yeast more safely. And also you've super chilled the wine, which means that you'll retain more of the carbon dioxide that you've gone through all the trouble of fermenting into the wine. At this point you can top up the bottle with a little bit of wine that's been sweetened, and you can determine at this point the sweetness of the finished wine. So a brut champagne or a brut sparkling wine like this one, if it's following, as Graham Beck do, the same conventions as the French, a brut sparkling wine will have somewhere between 5 and 15 grams per litre of sugar. In this instance, with the Graham Beck, we're looking at 9 grams per litre, 9.2 to be precise, 9.2 grams per litre of sugar. You can get them drier, you can get them sweeter. A demi-sec will have between 10 and 20. You've then got, well, you've got Doux, but it's a very rare style. Really sweet sparkling wines are very, very rare these days. The sweetest styles tend to be sparkling wines that have been tank fermented like that Prosecco, but the fermentation is interrupted, so it's naturally sweet. And there we're talking about wines like Asti, where the wine's made with the Moscato grape rather than the Prosecco or Glera grape, and the fermentation's interrupted before it's finished, so that you've got both carbon dioxide and a moderate amount of alcohol, but you've still got some of the natural grape sugars there. And if I'm honest, that's how I like my sweet bubbly. I don't like my sweet bubbly with lashings of sugar ladled in at the last moment. So a Doux champagne is not my idea of fun at all. I don't mind a well-made demi-sec, but my preferred style is brut or brut nature, no added sugar, depending on the winemaker and how well the wine's made. Anyway, back to Graham Beck. I haven't tasted this yet. So the aromas straight away: baked apple, a little bit of citrus, and a sort of creamy pastry note. Yeah, that's that sort of pastry element is very much an indicator of bottle fermented sparkling wine. It's a result of the contact with the yeast in the bottle. Yes, Rob, I'll taste it. Now, if I claim to absolutely love this wine, I'm in good company. This wine was served at it's Graham Beck. The nickname at Graham Beck for this wine is the President's Choice. It was served at the inauguration of President Mandela in South Africa, and also at both inaugurations for President Obama in the States. And it's a classy wine. Graham Beck started his winemaking business in 1983. The first non-vintage, the first time this wine was made, was in 1993, and by the time Graham died in 2010, he'd seen his wine served at the inauguration, 3 presidential inaugurations, which is amazing. A real tribute to the man. Non-vintage, it's based around a wine from one vintage. About 70-75% of the wine comes from that vintage, but then to achieve consistency of style, to ensure that every bottle of Graham Beck Brut is similar to every other bottle of Graham Beck Brut, it has the 15 to 25% reserve wines added that are kept in tank under usually a blanket of nitrogen or carbon dioxide to keep the wine inert, and very careful blending takes place to ensure that the finished sparkling wine will taste the same from one bottle to the next. I met a winemaker in Champagne who said that any fool can make great vintage champagne if the year is right, but it takes an artist to produce great non-vintage champagne every year. And that's true whether you're working with champagne or working with sparkling wine from anywhere in the world. I think to produce a consistent non-vintage that is good from one year to the next, it is really quite tricky. Oh, I see there's a bit of conversation going on about the demi-sec style. I have to agree. We do a lovely demi-sec from Night Timber, and those of you who know me will know how much I love Night Timber. Kaz jokes that I should have married Night Timber because we served at our wedding, and I talk about it more than I do about her. That's not, I don't think that's strictly true, but they do a lovely demi-sec called Cuvée Chérie. We're the only branch in London, I think, that has any stock of that. But it's gorgeous because it's got a riper, more sort of apricot note over the sort of soft pastry, and then it's got that slight sweetness to it. And you can put this up against desserts, but I agree, it's a nice aperitif. There is a rule of thumb that the sweeter the aperitif, the deader the palate. In other words, if you drink too much sweet wine at the start of a meal, it kills your appetite. And I think that's definitely true of the Sauterne and foie gras combination, which does work, but blimey, after you've had Sauterne and foie gras, you're not really in the mood for anything else. But demi-sec is that nice middle road of slight sweetness without overwhelming and deadening the palate. We also do a nice demi-sec from Taittinger, the Prelude, which is worth a try. And that's actually, you know what, all of these wines are on special offer at the moment. All of the sparkling wines in the Waitrose assortment are on offer until next Tuesday. So if you like any of the wines that we've tried tonight, or you're looking for some fizz for a postponed celebration, I appreciate that people haven't had much to celebrate in the last 3 months, or been able to get together to celebrate, and let's face it, fizz is something that we like to drink in company. Then now's a good time to come into Waitrose or the food hall and buy some, or you can get it online from waitrosecellar.com, and you'll get that within about 3 working days from Waitrose Cellar at the moment. So there's some fantastic offers. Right, that's about it from me. There are 3 very, very different styles of sparkling wine. So you've got the Chapel Down Bacchus, made by the, Josh will have to forgive me, made by the SodaStream method, the carbonated sparkling wine. We've got Valdo's magnificent tank fermented Prosecco. Incidentally, Valdo make 8 to 9 million bottles of wine, sparkling wine, a year. 9 million bottles of sparkling wine a year. That's more than England makes, but as a whole. Chapel Down produced just a few thousand bottles of that sparkling Bacchus. Graham Beck don't produce 9 million bottles, but they are quite a decent sized producer, and unusually for a New World winery, Graham Beck only produce sparkling wine. So everybody's going to have their favourites. I chose all three because I like them in different ways. Yeah, there we go, Sean. Absolutely. For me, I like all three of them. Different times, different places. The Chapel Down, I think, as I said, if I was watching the tennis and I had a bowl of strawberries, I would want a bottle of the Chapel Down. If I was having a party and I wanted everyone to enjoy themselves and everyone to enjoy the wine, I'd feel safe serving the Valdo. And if I wanted something where I was going to contemplate the complexity of the wine a little more and enjoy it for over a greater length of time, I'd probably go with the Graham Beck. So they've all got their place. They're all lovely wines. I hope you've all enjoyed this evening. We will put up another event. It'll either be in a week's time or a fortnight's time. I think doing these fortnightly might be as much as I can manage on my own like this, but do let me know if you've enjoyed it, and you just can't justify opening all three on the same night. Did you, Nick? I think you must have done. You can. It's true. You can't get the cork back in the bottle, but you can take an ordinary wine cork and shove it in the top there. You can get spring-loaded champagne stoppers and pop them back in the fridge, but personally I just take an ordinary wine cork, ram it in the bottle, put it in the fridge. I'm open to suggestions in the comments as to what to do next. I will be doing a video about making Negroni. Fizz doesn't keep. No, you're absolutely right, Nick. It doesn't keep in this house either. The old spoon method. I honestly think that the spoon method really does not work. I wish it did, but do you know what? One of the reasons why sparkling wine took so long to evolve in the scheme of things, really champagne, sparkling wines like this have only been around for 200 years. One of the reasons is that prior to the 18th century, people were still sealing bottles with a wooden plug wrapped in cloth, which barely kept the drafts out, let alone the fizz in. So until we started using cork again, and you could effectively seal the bottle with the cork, sparkling wine just wasn't a goer. One of the other reasons was, even once they started using cork, was that the bottles weren't necessarily strong enough. In fact, the French in the 17th century banned the export and transport of wine in bottles because of the danger of the bottles exploding, and so wine had to be shipped around in barrel and then bottled when you purchased it. Hence Boutellier, or butler, the bottler, the guy that if you were rich enough you employed one of your own to look after the wine in your cellar. But I digress, and I could go on about sparkling wine and sparkling wine history and methods all night, but I'm going to call it a night there. I hope you enjoyed this evening's tasting, and let me know in the comments of anything you'd like me to try and to talk about next time. Thank you for joining in.